Have you ever seen tail fins and car top tents before? These are just a small glimpse of nostalgic car innovations from the USA in the 1950s. When you're young, you often think that newer things are always better. But as you grow a bit older, you start to miss the way things used to be, especially when it comes to the cars you drive. But classic cars have special innovations that we miss more and more each day. So what are these unique things about old cars you don't see anymore? Join us as we explore the 13 weird car innovations that no longer exist. If we brought it out now, the Onboard record player would make hipsters everywhere extremely happy. The Chrysler Motor Company came up with this cool idea back in the 1950s. They installed a mini record player right into the dashboard beneath the AM radio. This mini player could spin specially made mini records. As you drove through the freshly developed suburbs and interstate highways of 1950-something America, everyone in the car could enjoy the tunes. Now you might wonder, what's so special about these mini records? They were designed to connect to the radio system, turning your car into a moving concert hall. As awesome as it sounds, selling these special-sized records to the public was quite challenging. People weren't too keen on adopting this new format, and slowly but surely, the whole idea started to fade away. Even though the Onboard record player became a thing of the past, it remains a fascinating glimpse into the creativity and innovation of the 1950s automotive industry. During the 1950s and 1960s, there was a time in car design known as the tail fin era. This style reached its peak between 1955 and 1961 and became popular worldwide. Car designers from different countries adopted trends from the United States, which was considered the golden age of American auto design and exceptionalism. The tail fins seen on cars from the 1950s were mostly chosen for their style. They were influenced by the futuristic and aerodynamic designs that were popular at the time. The goal was to give the cars a sense of speed and a modern look. While some designs took inspiration from the sleek lines of boats, the main aim was to make the cars look unique and attention-grabbing. Harley Earl, the design chief at General Motors, is often credited with introducing tail fins on the 1948 Cadillac. However, some sources suggest that the inventor-designer was Franklin Quick Hershey, the chief of the GM Special Car Design Studio when the 1948 Cadillac was being designed. Hershey got the idea for tail fins after seeing the twin rudders of a P-38 airplane at Selfridge Air Base. However, even when cars were parked, tail fins were criticized for safety concerns. In the Kahn v. Chrysler case, 1963, a 7-year-old child on a bicycle collided with a fin and suffered a head injury. Another case, Hatch v. Ford, 1958, involved children being injured by sharp protrusions on parked cars. Unfortunately, the plaintiffs lost both cases, resulting in the ban on tail fins. Back in 1959, Chrysler did something pretty cool with their cars. They added a smart feature to all 5 of their car brands: swing-out front seats to make it easier for people to get in and out of the car. This feature, known as sport swivel seats at DeSoto and swing-out seats at Dodge, was introduced for the 1959 model year. At Plymouth, Chrysler, and Imperial, it was simply called swivel seats. No matter what it was called, the idea was the same. The front seats could pivot outward by 40 degrees, making it more convenient for the driver and passenger to enter and exit the car, especially since the designer Exner liked low roof lines. The mechanism wasn't like a modern office chair. It had spherical nylon rollers in a circular steel channel under the seat. A chrome lever on the side of each seat cushion released a latch, allowing a helper spring to swing the seat on its track. While driving, the seats were supposed to stay locked in the forward position. This clever feature was advertised in 1959, but less in 1960. Surprisingly, the swivel seats were discontinued after 1961, and the reasons were never announced. General Motors tried something similar in the 1970s, but swivel bucket seats disappeared from cars, probably due to safety and space concerns. Nowadays, it's doubtful we'll see them again in cars.
And with GM Hydromatic Drive, there's no gear shifting, no clutch pushing. Just step on the gas and go. The smart way, the futuramic way, the Oldsmobile way.
A car top tent, also known as a rooftop tent, is an extra part you can add to the top or bed of your car. It lets people sleep safely and comfortably above their vehicle, keeping the inside space free for other things. The first roof tents showed up in Western Europe in the 1930s. People usually put roof tents on tough off-road vehicles like Land Rovers, but you can attach them to almost any car. Even the Tesla Model Y is a popular choice for roof tents. These tents typically connect to a car's roof rack or special bars you add later. In Italy, these tents are popular and can be found in small cars like the Fiat Panda. At first, roof tents were like regular tents that folded up small, sat on a wooden base, and were placed on a roof rack. But in 1958, newer designs came out. These tents were stored in a waterproof fiberglass or carbon fiber box. You could set them up and take them down quickly using a crank or gas rams that automatically lifted the tent when you released the latches. In 2003, a French company developed another design, making simple, lightweight tents that look like modern ground tents. In the 1960s, tents were made from a soft fabric. People fixed them directly on top of their vehicles. To get inside, they would place a ladder at the front of the vehicle. As time passed and people got smarter, they devised hard-shell tents. These new tents were made from fiberglass, carbon fiber, and ABS plastic. People worked on creating better systems and designs for these tents, and that's how we got the tents we use today. Setting up and closing these tents used to be a bit of a task, taking at least 10 minutes to get everything in place. But as technology improved and ideas evolved, the process became easier and quicker. Originally, cars had a 2-speed transmission, but later it was upgraded to 3 speeds. After 1965, these types of transmissions started to be replaced by lever systems in vehicles. One of the first companies to use push-button transmission was Packard. However, they encountered problems with fuses, electricity, and power, which led to the cancellation of the series. So how does push-button transmission work? To choose a gear, you press a button on the shift control. The electrical circuit only closes when you fully press the clutch pedal, shifting the gearbox into neutral, and then the chosen gear is done by activating the relevant transmission's solenoids. Push-button start has its complications. It may take more time if you don't know how to lock the car using the key fob or the remote system. If you happen to drop the key fob inside the car, that can be quite an unlucky situation. While modern systems offer increased security, they also face the risk of hacking. Some argue that a mechanical ignition system may be more effective than the latest technology. It's considered necessary to move towards a solution without a transmission lever. Despite numerous technological advancements, manufacturers have not replaced the lever. The introduction of touchscreens, fingerprint recognition, Arkansas, and VR makes a leverless car a possibility. Although push-button transmission was introduced decades ago, top manufacturers like Toyota, Ford, and BMW are revisiting it. Testing and research are underway, and fans can expect the introduction of knobs and push buttons, promising a more reliable and comfortable driving experience in the future. It's important to note that push-button transmission started in 1954, credited to Chrysler. Initially introduced with a 2-speed system, it was later upgraded to 3 speeds. After 1965, these models were phased out in favor of lever systems. Chrysler decided to discontinue push-button transmissions based on business judgment rather than government regulations. Let's take a trip down memory lane to explore the history of car radios. In 1922, Chevrolet introduced the first car radio, which was quite a luxury back then. Priced at a hefty $200, it came with a large antenna covering the entire car roof, bulky batteries squeezing under the front seat, and 2 massive speakers attached behind the seat. It was about as convenient as carrying a live orchestra on your car ride. In the early 1930s, we saw the introduction of more practical built-in Motorola radios in cars, becoming standard features. As the decade progressed, improvements like push-button tuning and presets made it easier for drivers to select radio stations without diverting their attention from the road. By 1946, around 9 million cars were equipped with radios. The invention of transistors in the following years significantly reduced the size and cost of car radios. By 1963, more than 60% of cars, totaling 50 million, were fitted with radios, and over a third of radio listening in the United States happened in cars. Interestingly, in 1930, laws were proposed in Massachusetts and St. Louis to ban radios while driving. Even the Auto Club of New York agreed, with 56% of respondents in a 1934 poll considering car radios a dangerous distraction. On the opposing side, the Radio Manufacturers Association argued that car radios could be valuable for warning drivers about bad weather and road conditions, and keeping them alert during long drives. In the 1950s and 1960s, cars had spare tires mounted on the outside. This was because back then, cars usually came with a spare tire and wheel already attached, and it made sense to have it easily accessible in case a driver needed to change a tire. Many car makers placed the spare tire, or sometimes even two, on the back of the car. Some cars had spare tires mounted on the sides, behind the front wheels. This design was not only functional, but also added a unique touch to the car's appearance. In particular, European sports cars had spare tires at the back due to limited trunk space. Interestingly, these spare tires at the rear or sides were not called continental tires. As car designs evolved, enclosed trunks became popular. This allowed spare tires to be hidden from view but came at the cost of trunk space. To address this, car manufacturers introduced the side mount option, placing spare tires on the sides to free up trunk capacity. Spare tires were fitted inside the trunk in some sports cars, creating a snug fit. This design even led to a portion of the tire protruding into the passenger area, requiring a vinyl cover. As cars continued to develop, the location of spare tires changed, reflecting advancements in design, functionality, and storage solutions.
The first cars had no windshields, so first they put them on as an extra, straight up and down, just like you see right here.
Popular from the 1950s to the 1970s, vent windows were those little triangular windows you'd find beside the main window of cars. The vent window is a small glass window next to the main window of a car door. In the past, many old cars had these little windows to let air in and keep the inside cool. Like the main window, you could open and close these vent windows independently. This way, you could have air flowing through the car without making a mess. But then, air conditioning came along, and these cool triangular windows disappeared. They became a thing of the past. Back then, cars like the 1933 Pontiac Economy 8 had front and rear vent windows called ventiplanes. These were in all GM cars that year. The vent windows had hinges and a latch so that you could open them for more ventilation. In 1933, all GM vehicles got optional vent windows, first called no-draft individually controlled ventilation, and later renamed ventiplanes. After the 1960s, most cars stopped having these vent windows for a sleeker look, known as ventless windows. Some car makers, like American Motors with the AMC Pacer, still offered front vent windows for better airflow. However, these windows had issues like air turbulence and leaks that outweighed their benefits. With more people using car air conditioning, front window vents disappeared by the 1980s. A hood ornament, also known as a motor mascot or car mascot, is a special model representing a car company. It's like a badge and is usually placed in the middle of the front of the car hood. People have been using these decorations on cars almost since cars were first invented. The idea of hood ornaments goes way back. The first one mentioned in a book for young people was a falcon with a sun crest placed on the chariot of the Egyptian pharaoh Tutankhamun for good luck. In the early days of cars, the radiator caps were outside the hood on top of the grille. These caps also showed the temperature of the engine's coolant fluid. In 1912, the Boyce Motometer Company got a patent for a radiator cap with a visible thermometer for the driver. This was helpful because many early cars didn't have water pumps like today. Instead, they used a system called thermosiphon, like in the Ford Model T. The radiator cap became a big deal for personalizing cars. Hood ornaments became popular in the 1920s to the 1950s, and many car makers added them to their vehicles. Advertisements for Mercedes-Benz in the 1920s focused on their star hood ornament as a symbol of luxury and the oldest automobile works in the world. People started customizing their cars by adding these ornaments, expressing their love for their vehicles or showing their uniqueness. There was even a market for accessories to add these ornaments. Most of the companies making these accessories went out of business, except for Louis Lejeune Limited in England. In the 1950s to the 1970s, cars had something called manual choke controls. These controls were used to help start the engine in cold weather, but they didn't look very fancy. Back in the day, when cars were older, you needed a choke to handle the mix of air and fuel when starting a cold engine. This choke would limit the amount of air going into the carburetor, making the fuel mixture richer to make it easier to start in the cold. As the engine got warmer, the choke would slowly open up, letting in more air and adjusting the air-fuel ratio for regular operation. Nowadays in modern cars, we don't need chokes anymore. Instead of manual controls, we have fuel injection systems. These systems don't require a separate choke because the engine control unit, a smart computer in the car, can automatically adjust the air-fuel mixture based on different factors in the engine. With technological advancements, we've moved away from the manual choke controls of the past to more sophisticated systems that make starting and running a car in different conditions much smoother and more efficient. Motorola introduced the car phone in America back in 1946. It worked in Chicago using Bell Systems radio technology to connect the car phone to landlines across the country. However, these early systems had limitations. They could only handle 3 calls at a time, leading to long waiting times. The car phones were also heavy, weighing around 80 pounds, and required professional installation. The coverage area was also limited, so the technology didn't catch on quickly. The car phone made its way to the UK in 1959, introduced by the General Post Office, later known as British Telecom. In October that year, parts of Northern England received the service as a trial. MP and Postmaster General Reginald Bevan made the first UK car phone call while driving in Lancashire to Lord Rootes in London. The UK's first system, System 1, could connect up to 320 drivers to the exchange, connecting the call to a landline. However, due to user limits, installation costs, and the time required for transmitters, it took until 1965 for car phones to reach London. Prime Minister Harold Wilson made the first call in the capital, boosting the popularity of this new mobile communication. In the 1970s, System 2 and System 3 were introduced, each capable of handling more calls. System 3 in particular featured automatic channel scanning, making it easier to find a free line for outgoing calls. As these improvements took place, car phones became more popular and widespread.
Your customers demanding more hot in their hot cars, more big in their big cars, more new in their new cars. It's swingers swinging to Dodge.
In the 1970s, the automotive landscape witnessed the popularity of T-bar shifters, a distinctive and stylish feature in many cars of that era. The T-bar shifter, also known as a Hurst shifter, presented a unique and ergonomic design resembling the letter T. Positioned on the center console, it allowed drivers to shift gears with a distinctive and satisfying motion, enhancing the overall driving experience. Many car enthusiasts and collectors like using manual transmissions instead of automatic ones. They prefer it because it gives them more control over how fast the car goes and makes them feel more connected to the vehicle. But back in the 1950s, some drivers were unhappy with manual shifters. They either found them too difficult to use for everyday driving or too clunky to enjoy, even if they were used to manual transmissions. People wanted a better system, and that's when the Hurst Shifter came into play. The Hurst Shifter became well known for its unique and improved design. The name Hurst comes from the founders George Hurst and Bill Campbell, who started a company called Hurst Campbell in 1958. Initially, they ran auto repair shops, but with financial support from Lawrence Greenwald, one of their customers, they ventured into manufacturing aftermarket bumpers for VW buses. When VW started making enough bumpers on their own, Hurst Campbell switched gears, pun intended, to focus on creating specialized gear shifters. The Hurst Shifter quickly gained popularity for its exceptional performance. Even today, collectors value it as much as car enthusiasts did decades ago. However, by 1970, the Hurst Company, as it was known during that period, ceased to exist. Despite its short-lived era, the impact of the Hurst Shifter on the automotive world is still felt today.